Okay, we'll give people 1 more minute while we get set up. Just for the record, Christy brought up the rebranding question, and we're probably going to defer that until first quarter to start the process of looking for a new name to resolve branding issues. So if anybody has suggestions or would like to work on that effort, we'd welcome the contributions. And we have a much smaller crowd today. I think we're getting close to the holiday season and things are going to start being interesting that way.
Quiet, perhaps.
Yes, quiet. Future agenda items. So work will go on, but maybe we'll have less chatting about it. Okay, that's enough time elapsed. We have sufficient people to get started. We'll go over some of the fun and interesting parts that are standard for our meetings. A review of the Linux Foundation antitrust policy that's contained at the link listed in our meeting notes. Basically, business arrangements or pricing are things that should not be discussed, business opportunities, specific business opportunities. And so we're trying to steer clear of the federal and international regulations on antitrust. So please do not engage in such conversations on these calls. If you think that such conversations are occurring, please ask one of the hosts, either Keela or myself, or whoever's hosting that day, to stop the conversation and make sure that we're not engaging in that type of activity. The second thing is our Cardia Code of Conduct, listed again at the link found in our meeting notes. And that basically, to be summarized, is everyone has a voice and is welcome. Be nice to each other. If you have a problem with people not being nice, or there's any intimidation or bullying or lack of opportunity to express yourself, please contact either Keela or myself. If you have a problem with the way either Keela or myself are behaving, please contact the Linux Foundation. You can talk to us first. If we have a problem, we'll try to resolve it. But if you don't feel that you're satisfactorily getting those issues resolved, then contact the Linux Foundation and they will help resolve any such issues. We typically allow time for introductions. If there are people who would like to introduce themselves or who haven't introduced themselves for quite a while, now is the time to do it. I think we see mostly familiar faces, so it's not surprising that no one wants to introduce themselves today. Today we want to get our conversation started on our Interop profile, and that's to help tease out what we're going to try to accomplish in our next Interop event and how we define that process. If we got the meeting notes in the chat, I think so.
Yes, I've pasted them. I'll paste them again as more people join.
Okay. So to kick off our Interop profile discussion, there's a couple of things that are key elements. And I've listed 3 of them in the agenda for today. One of them is a reference to a base Interop profile. The second is the machine readable governance bits and pieces. It's a complex subject. How much of it do we want to try to tackle? The third issue around it is which protocols do we specifically want to call out and use that are different over and above improvements marching forward in time and progress with regards to our last Interop event. So throughout the discussion for referencing the Aries Interop profiles. are there thoughts on that?
If I recall from previous discussion a couple weeks ago, that was a sort of an idea that we were leaning toward, and then calling out differences, if I'm not mistaken, where it deviates, if it deviates. So that's what I remember. I'm not sure if others want to pipe in on that.
So this is Mike. I actually haven't looked at the Aries Interop profiles, so I'm not familiar with what's entailed there.
Your team members have looked at the Aries Interop profiles. Currently, we're operating on basically the Aries Interop profile 1.0 version, and the stuff that you're using is based on that. That's DIDCOM V1. It's the presentation of proof V1. It's the kind of the basic mechanisms for the exchanges that we're doing today are based off of Aries Interop profile 1.0. There is a new Aries Interop profile 2.0 that is still not, I think, completely ratified, nor is there a broad support for it yet. So I think that it would be useful to pin down the fact that we're using Aries Interop profile 1.0 and then list deviations from that. I think that will give people a sense of both our interoperability with the Aries community at large, and give them a frame of reference for where we are in our current progression. Any discussion on that?
So I took a quick peek, and the Aries Interop profile, the most immediately useful thing to my quick glance was that there's a table that lists, here are the protocols that will be in use and their version numbers. And I think that if we were to say, we're going to start with the Aries Interop profile and build a similar table and have an entry or a marker that says, hey, please note that this particular line is different than the standard Aries Interop profile, if there are any differences. If I were to be, based on what I've heard in the last 10 minutes, trying to build one, that's kind of sounds like a pretty good place to start. So I'm catching up to y'all, and that sounds like a decent place to start.
There are places in the Aries Interop profile where there is not sufficient detail for what we're doing. So we can't just say wholesale that we're going to use Aries Interop profile 1.0, because there's nothing in Aries Interop profile 1.0 that talks about machine readable governance, for instance, or anything that talks about the schemas that would be in use in an ecosystem. So it's missing a number of key elements. We can't completely adopt Aries Interop profile 1.0 and say that's both sufficient and clear enough for describing what we have to do.
So there's two ways that we're going to deviate then. We're either going to have something that is distinctly different than the baseline profile, or we're going to have an expansion. Is that fair?
That is, I think, very accurate. So we'll call out differences between AIP 1.0 and Cardia Interop profile 2.0, because we already did our 1.0. You can't go back and really change that one. We could go to a 1.1. I think that the addition of machine readable governance is significant enough to warrant a change to a 2.0 on the versioning of the Interop profile. So we're going to call out differences. Oh, we got to say
And expansions.
extensions is typically the way they're listed. Extension, expansion, tomato.
Yes.
There, but to call out both those are the significant deviations. I don't think there's anything where we are going to retrograde motion, move backwards in time or progress on Aries Interop profile 1.0. So we're not going to go backwards to something that was prior to Aries Interop profile 1.0. So I don't think that we need to consider any of those. As we consider Aries Interop Profile 2.0, there may be some pieces of that where you adopt part of it without having to hit it all. Because I think that's kind of how the nature of the tech will roll out. Okay, so some of the extensions involve machine readable governance and some of them involve protocols. Machine readable governance is such a large topic that I've had one suggestion in between our last meeting and this meeting to call out a subset of machine readable governance that might be interesting and doable for all of our participants to accomplish during the time frame between now and January, when we have tentatively scheduled our Interop event. I would like to entertain some suggestions and discussion about what aspects of machine readable governance might be candidates for inclusion in our first Interop event.
Can we just start with listing some ways to slice and dice it, and then we can decide which of those?
Yes. So Simon, as a heavy contributor to machine readable governance, are there particular aspects that you would see as building blocks or early steps in implementation of partners in the Cardia space to implement their first baby steps towards machine readable governance?
I don't know if I know the exact answer to that, but I think that Interopathon would allow spread the information and let other participants try and test it. And if that goes really well, it will spread the word, and other people might be and companies might be interested in trying to adopt the technology. So I think we just need to try to focus on getting Interopathon ready and make it nice and smooth.
Mike, do you have a comment?
Yes. So one of the very first things that machine readable governance was designed to do that most agents are not presently doing, but if they're going to be Cardia compatible, should do soon, is to check the list of participants to make sure you're interacting with an agent that's mentioned in the governance.
A trustworthy participant.
Yeah, so a participant trust check or something like, labeled something like that.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go to, Mike. Who's playing,
Yep.
who's talking to each other would be, to me, a really easy and obvious first one.
Do you think that participant trust checking should involve the role of the participant as well? Or do you think that a role is independent of the first level of checking?
The roles become useful when you're trying to determine whether a particular participant is behaving in a manner that is consistent with the kind of the rules and the norms of this ecosystem. And in order to check that, you have to have actions that are implemented in a meaningful way. We don't have the actions fully ready the way I want them to be for a release to open source code. And so
actions might include more detail than we need. Is there something that associates a participant with issuance, for instance, or a participant with a schema or a cred def or anything like that?
So we have code that would say who is allowed to be, in order to determine whether someone is issuing when they're not supposed to or verifying when they're not supposed to, they'd actually have to take out, they'd have to be taking that action, and you'd have to have a way to say, is that action in their list of things that they're allowed to do? And the way we're even going to list actions, we're, by the time we get to January, I'm hoping to be doing slightly differently. So
so there's roles are dependent on support for action verification, let's say.
mm-hmm.
And so that's roles by itself are not a bundle, a building block that independently can be tacked on to machine readable governance testing.
Right. Roles are a bridge between actions and participants. And so as a bridge, if you've only got one side of the bridge, then it's a bridge to nowhere. So we have to wait till we have the other side of the bridge built before it'll be a useful thing to check.
Can action, or oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I have a question here, and I'm still learning about machine readable governance, but I'm trying to become as familiar as possible with the applications you anticipate. In the application I anticipate, some of those participants will have different roles, but they'll be the same participant. For example, one participant could have 3 or 4 roles depending on the transaction that's occurring. So does the machine readable governance contemplate that?
Yes, it does. So when you look at the machine readable governance, besides a list of participants, there would be the list of roles, and the list of roles have there's a permissions table that links the two. So you say participant 1 is a health issuer, participant 2 is a health verifier and a travel issuer, participant 3 is a travel verifier. So you can have participants that are holding multiple roles, and the permissions table says this agent, this participant has this role or these roles. And then from there you would go to an actions table. And previously we had a privileges table, which is distinct from permissions, that would say which role can do this action. And so to see, in order to check if a participant is behaving according to their role, if you have a verifier that's trying to issue, or if you have an agent that's trying to verify, that's supposed to be a travel verifier, and they're trying to verify your health information, those are actions that fall outside of what they're supposed to do. But unless we've got the section about how we define the actions pinned down, then it's hard to programmatically check whether someone's behaving, taking actions that they're allowed to.
Okay, thank you.
So, Christy, I think that's an excellent question, and it leads towards the more complete implementation of machine readable governance. We're trying to in this first Interopathon, identify a subset of that is still meaningful, so that people can start the process of loading in the machine readable governance file, parsing it, and coming up with a useful and meaningful action in the first interop. By the time the following subsequent interop should occur, I think we should have a full test of all the actions and all the features of machine readable governance. I think that gives people sufficient time to implement and be ready to test. But your question is spot on, and identifies the complexity of different organizations that might have more than one role. And they might have a role associated with one particular type of credential and a different role associated with other types of credentials. They might just be issuers on one type, issuer and verifier on another type, and not involved at all in a third type of credential that's in the ecosystem. They're not allowed to touch any of those. So those types of situations and the ability to handle all of the complexities of multiple roles for participants is the end goal.
So,
okay, good. Can I ask one? It's not really an ask. I just want to give you an example. So I understand what you're saying. Here's the functionality I require. Say we'll have, there's someone who asks for data to be collected by a third party, and that data comes from a fourth party. I might just have to say this for what it is. It'll be easier. So say a sports team engages a data collector to collect data from the team's athlete. And then once that data is collected, of course, it needs to be verified. And that data would then have to be verified by the data collector and the athlete it was collected from. Eventually, it would probably have to be verified by the team, because the team at some point is going to want to push that data out and license it to other entities. So the team in this example would have multiple roles, even with the same data.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Yes, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So
Those are
an
the-
example.
Those are the exact complex situations that we thought trust registries weren't going to solve. And we needed something more complex to handle that, to be able to handle it in a fashion that could be easily updated and adopted to the changing circumstances of how an organization might interact with its data and other organizations or people.
Okay, good. That's good to know, because that's a very simple example of what I expect to be a fairly complex transactional marketplace, not just in sharing and verifying data, but then selling or licensing data for money, etc.
Yeah, so here in the Cardia ecosystem, there's a role that says verify identity is one of the things that someone's allowed to do. And I think there are 4 different agents that share that role. And then, you know, so in particular, the government agent has, I think, 4 or 5 different roles that it's allowed to carry out in this ecosystem, because it's kind of the hub or the nexus of what's going on here. And then there are other agents where they have a singular function or 2 functions where they say, we're going to verify some data and then take an action based on it. Or some that say, we're simply going to check it. So there are some parallels that I can see already with your use case. The way we're headed with the actions, we're also hoping to define a way to specify various workflows that could be carried out by those particular agents to say, okay, here's the travel workflow, here's the health workflow, here's the hospitality workflow, or in your case, here's the sign as an athlete workflow, here's the licensing workflow, here's the statistics checking workflow, or whatever you have. So we're hoping to have batches of actions that are built into workflows and tied to roles, so that you can see who is supposed to be doing what and whether they're acting inside of the boundaries that they're supposed to follow. And and that can be verified against a governance file that everybody's sharing, so you can have consensus on what you're supposed to do. So
Wonderful, thank you.
An order might matter. Order
It
and how those
does
are.
in
Yeah.
my case, absolutely, because
The
those
order is-
hats, the one party who can wear that hat can change hats and wear 4 or 5, no, at least 3 or 4 hats, I think, at
Not
different
5.
times in the same process. Maybe not 5.
Not 5, just 4.
Well, whether it's 2 or 7, the actions that are in those workflows, each individual action will be tied to a role, so that in order for an agent to complete all of the actions, they would have to be wearing the commensurate hats. They have the proper roles, and they, even in one workflow, they will be changing. So like, for example, the travel workflow with the government, they start off as a health verifier, and then they end as in the middle, they're a travel issuer, and then they can also verify that travel data at a later date or something like that. So they do
Right,
wear
okay.
multiple roles through the process that they follow.
Okay, thanks for connecting dots for me.
So excellent questions. As a comment on the governance and the Interopathon, so I think that at the moment, I'm writing my first, or I'm not writing, I'm helping Simon write the first batch of code that is going with this. So I'm helping with definitions and helping him write the code. We're not 100% on the actions. So for this Interopathon, I would propose that we work on something that we know how to do, which is to verify the participants. And then at his following Interopathon, we can follow the more complex governance. And part of the reason for doing that is that it's not ready. And the other part is that one of the other things I want to try in this Interopathon is under profile or protocols. And if you do participant verifying, and then the thing I want to test under protocols, that's a fair amount of work to ask everyone to do for one Interopathon.
And that thing is
The presentation definitions. And so we have some complex verification requirements for our health use case here. And in order to handle those, we're the best route forward that we could find was to use the diffs presentation exchange definitions here. And so in January, it would be nice to do some work around handling complicated presentations and proof requests and things like that.
So is that one work that you're suggesting that we use for the Interop-a-thon, or to have that work occur in January for the subsequent Interop 3?
Depending on which protocol we choose to use, it could be one or the other. If we choose to use question and answer protocol to answer the questions and then receive proof requests, we can do that in January. If we decide that that should not become part of the Cardia code base and we want to go straight to the better method, which is present proof version 2 and direct use of the presentation definitions, then that would be the one after. So,
And I did bring this up before everybody jumped on the call, and it's in our future agenda items under multiple credential presentations. So that is certainly a conversation we can have, and we probably should get some guidance on whether we should support both, or, as you've said, skip one that is a user engaging in a screen and go directly to the sort of behind the scenes option. I don't know what the right answer is there, and certainly if you want to have a chat about it now, we could open that discussion, but perhaps we just go back to figuring out is
That's a good
the
discussion
trust
to have now, because that I think has significant impact on the Interop event, whether we're changing from what we did in first Interop. We're either going to use Q&A with presentation V1 or presentation V2. And the reason we're doing that, Mike, is that we can't accomplish what we need to with the old style the old protocols had insufficient support to get the job done, right?
That's right. So in order to meet the complex presentation requirements in a way that existing mobile agents, existing holder agents can handle, the old protocols are too clumsy. The number of variations of presentations, we've seen as many as 15, and that's before adding the different types of vaccinations that are available. And so that could, if you add 3 types of vaccinations, that could be 45 variations now. And so handling that gigantic, explosion of possibilities is really hard with simply present proof version 1. You need something to supplement it or replace it.
So the Q&A protocol to basically supplement presentation
Version 1.
version 1, or move to presentation exchange definitions, which is basically the V2 of that presentation exchange. And that
It'd be present proof version 2 plus presentation definitions. They're 2 separate things in conjunction, but yeah.
And can you translate what that means to the individual engaging?
So with question and answer, in order to narrow the field of presentations that are possible from 45 or 60 or 15 down to 2 or 3, the idea would be to have the verifying agent ask a question or 2 that says, hi, we're going to need some health information in order to prove, in this case, that you're not sick with COVID or that you're less likely to spread it. Would you like to accomplish this by presenting a vaccine and a lab, or a lab that has to be more recent or of a different nature than the one that went with the vaccine, or an exemption plus a lab, or some kind of combination like that, depending on your requirements. So the question and answer is a progressive disclosure where you find out some information before the full formal request in order to narrow the possibilities. So that it requires a little user knowledge and a little user interaction in order to function. With the present proof version 2 and the presentation exchange, the presentation definition would outline all of the possible ways to satisfy the proof, and the present proof version 2 would be a way for the verifier to pass that presentation definition to the holder. The holder would examine the presentation definition to find out what options are available, and would compare those options against what the holder has available. And if it has any options that meet those requirements, it could tell the user, you can do, you meet these requirements. If it's one way, it could do it automatically. If it was 2 ways, you could ask the user which way they want to do it, or just, you know, satisfy it either way. But it's a single request and potentially automated flow. It requires less of the user and no initial disclosures. So if you do question and answer, you could answer the questions and find out that you still can't satisfy the proof. Whereas with present proof version 2, you could examine the options, and if you don't satisfy the presentation requirements, then you have disclosed no information whatsoever.
So the ultimate solution to the problem is to implement presentation exchange plus presentation definitions, but that's a little bit more work, and
yeah.
And therefore you think that the timeline for a January interop might be too aggressive?
Yes. One possibility that we could use to approach this is to say question and answer may be a useful protocol for us to support even after we have present proof version 2 and presentation definitions. And so maybe it's useful to do a question and answer plus present proof version 1 interop in January, and then replace the present proof version 1 part with present proof version 2, and maybe temporarily neglect or not utilize question and answer until we need it again later. That's an option.
Well, it really depends on the the user interfacing that solutions are going to want to support, right? Do you want the end user to be more heavily engaged, or do you want to sort of build some of that logic into it? And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to that question. Although if we wear our hat from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about eliminating some of the barriers to actually making this useful on the ground, in which case I would lean toward the logical one. But that doesn't mean everybody's going to want that.
So as far as privacy preservation, the present proof version 2, where there's less or no disclosure ahead of the presentation, is a slightly better practice. But from our own experience, we recognize that that's, there may be other situations that necessitate a little bit of interaction ahead of time, or for other things.
So Mike, in the notes, I've said a natural progression for this is Q&A with present proof version 1, Q&A with present proof version 2, presentation definitions with present proof version 2. Is that am I exaggerating or misrepresenting the logical sequence of development, or should we be skipping some of those steps and going right to one or the other? Do you have recommendations or thoughts?
So Q&A with present proof version 1 is what I have to roll out for a trial in the short term. Present proof version 2 with presentation definitions is an important standard to meet for privacy preservation. We'll want to get there eventually. Whether we want to take the middle step or not may be optional.
And sort of like good, better, best. But and
yes.
the one that would be could be ready for a January interopathon is that first sub bullet.
Yes.
Does that come at a cost of doing something else during the interopathon?
So far we have participant trust checking, and Also a possibility to do something with presentations. We can revisit the things that we were interoping on before to say, can people actually connect and receive credentials? Can we do a proof request for identity information? We could revisit some of those things. There are probably yet other options that we've not discussed yet. And so the question is, how much can we bite off? So yes, the presentations piece here may be at the exclusion of something else.
Okay, so let's get to what else might want to be on that list, which I see you adding, Ken, the shortened URL discussion, which was a really critical component of our last Interopathon.
So is your recommendation, so if we want to do an Interop event in January, there's really not, unless people are going to wildly scramble, there's not really a chance to get both presentation definitions and present proof 2.0 ready in that time frame.
I won't be ready, and therefore I won't be able to tell other people how to be ready.
If you can't be ready on the reference implementation, I don't know how anyone else could possibly be ready. That's my thinking.
Yeah, so the present proof version 2 was never on the table, in my opinion, for the January one.
Okay. I think that we should, unless there's any objection, we should decide that we're going to do participant trust checking. I think we kind of decided that one. And we should decide that we're going to do Q&A with present proof 1.0 for the Interop event. And that will push us forward quite a bit, but it won't get us to the ultimate goal. But I don't think the ultimate goal is achievable in the time frame. So I think it's foolish to try to bite that one off, because I don't think we'll get, it's questionable whether the reference implementation could be ready. Therefore, I don't know how anyone could implement and test against the reference implementation in the time frame.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think one of the lessons learned from our last Interopathon is to try to have that reference out there with a little wiggle room before the Interopathon.
So last time we only had about a week and a half before the Interopathon. Since we're nearly code complete with question and we will be code complete with question and answer and present proof in about 2.5 weeks. If we can get this reference implementation public and some documentation in early to mid-December, that would give people at least 2 weeks plus some holiday time, maybe some more time, maybe 3 weeks instead of a week and a half or less. So yeah, that's probably wise to give people a little more time to adjust to what we're doing.
I put shortened URLs. It's not really a protocol, but it's kind of the part of the connection protocol. And we decided that we were going to implement those. Is that still the case, that those would be ready for our next Interop event, so that those who are using shortened URLs would be compatible?
Good question. I don't know on that one. I'd have to ask around and do a little research.
So that one's not a question of other people having to pick it up and do it. That's a question of people who have already done it and making the reference implementation compatible. And so I think that it might be safer to have that one be available. And if that was ready in the first week of January and we're testing in the last week of January, I think that's more than adequate time for the Interop event on shortened URLs.
Because the reference implementation is actually the implementation of about 5 different agents, knowing the state of shortened URLs across the entire batch of agents, I don't know all of them and where shortened URLs are in development or release or what. So I would have to get back to this group on where we're at with that. But to have shortened URLs ready by early January, that gives us enough time to hopefully get all of the reference implementations ready to go with that.
Okay, so that one is not a determined. That's a go check and see if we can make that occur. I don't think there's a lot of discussion to have on that. We've had previous discussions on implementing it. It's a question of going out and making it work. I don't
Yep.
think we have to have ultimate support to generate those inside the reference implementation. We just need to know how to consume them,
Mhm.
right?
And that has the potential to disqualify a few people from an Interopathon because of their use of shortened URLs, right?
Yes.
So that would be an important one to try to tackle.
But I do think that there's, like I said, I think it can come later because it's not effort that people have to do. It's effort on the consumption side. So there's not the complexity of generating one in a way that makes it neutral and happy and everything. It's, can I consume one?
Yeah.
So Mike, if you will check on that, I think that would be a helpful thing. Are there any people who are opposed? Has there been any change of heart on the consumption of shortened URLs? Anybody have some thoughts on that? Negative thoughts? Opposition? Raise your hand. Squawk. I'll give that another 2 seconds. Going once, going twice, gone. We're gonna try to do that. So we'll check on the schedule and see if it's possible. The other topic that we had was connection-oriented exchanges, and that is a do nothing for the reference implementation, but is a do something for participants. So I want to make sure that we're publicizing the fact that we are doing connection-oriented exchanges and that all of the participants are aware of that up front, that we, in our announcement of the Interop profile, that we clearly articulate that so that there's no surprises. I don't want somebody to come to the Interop event and say, oh, I thought you were going to add connection lists and be sad. I don't want sadness. I want people to be happy and interoperate.
So maybe that just needs to be as we sort of start to plan for what is going to be tackled by the Interopathon and sort of the marketing for participation in that, it goes in the sort of assumptions list of if you want to play, you must meet these technical assumptions.
Okay, I agree. So that brings us to the last point of this Interop section is how are we going to communicate this? Last time we had, what did we use to communicate our Interop? Mike, what was the mechanism that we used?
We had a couple emails and we listed some stuff on the Cardia GitHub repository.
And the Cardia website.
And the Cardia website, yeah.
Is that sufficient? Is that mechanism adequate to get the word out?
I would ask if there's anything that LFPH can or should do in addition to that. Perhaps they can tweet it or post it on their website. I mean, there's different levels of invested time there, but we should certainly see what's available. There's the Slack channel also while you're listing places we can distribute information.
One possibility related to distribution that also brings up another topic is that I've was asked to share kind of a progress update and minor roadmap with the Aries working group. And there were inquiries from several people at the Aries working group. They wanted to know if Cardia was open to doing some interop on things that weren't strictly medical, but were related to just ecosystems in general. So for example, there was interest in the process of, some work around know your customer, KYC, where we have some of that happening with medical, and there are other people who would like to give it a try or whatever. And so there, for some of the things that we're doing that are generally applicable, we might be able to have additional participants and additional publicity from some other working groups or communities. And doing a KYC interop, obviously, I don't think we'll be ready for January, but that's one that we could cover at another future interop later on.
So a KYC one that's not specific to Cardia is something that we could participate in as a a mechanism for checking the interoperability of KYC, which might be broader, a much broader community than strictly the medical side. And I think that's something we should investigate participating in, but not being the host of. I don't think we're the hub around medical credentials. We're not the hub around which KYC revolves. And so I think another working group, either in Aries or somewhere else, might be a better place for us to participate in that one rather than try to host one of our own. We can do our own KYC event specifically around medical KYC or government travel KYC as that point arrives. But I think it would benefit us to explore the possibility of participating in an Aries Interop event on KYC.
Yeah, I think part of what was going on there is there were several people hoping someone else would be in charge.
We might be in charge, and if we do one, we'll put our own focus around it to make sure that it meets our own needs, and then try to broaden it to see if we can get others to participate. But I think that we have the potential of hosting something like that. But if it's a broader community, if it's financial people trying to do KYC and it's other people besides medical, they'll have a different take on it. And if we host it, we might not meet their needs. But I think we can explore hosting it as well. But there are other groups that are focused on KYC more than we are, and it might be behoove us to either work with them, or if they're unwilling to do it, invite them to one of ours.
Well, it raises. It's
ahead.
interesting because we just had a meeting or two ago discussion about how do we increase awareness. And so I think building that bridge, even if we end up hosting it, which I know isn't a lot of effort, so it's not something to be taken lightly, but it would bring more people into our discussion, potentially for other exposure. So worth considering.
So I
think that
agree. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree that we should remain medically focused. That's the mission of Cardia. I think that if we define how our interop is going to work and what the expectations are, and then share that with people, if that sharing is clear, then they can decide for themselves whether they want to participate in a medically focused KYC or a medical credential kind of space. If that meets their needs, then they'd be welcome. And if not, then we'd have to look at other venues for the more generic or other applications to say, let's do financial or something, driver's license or whatever. That would be a different event if it doesn't fit in what we're doing for medical.
Okay, I think the Keela's suggestion of building the bridge is a good one. Whether we build the bridge in our sovereign state or we build it on somebody else's dirt, that's kind of the question to be answered about where the bridge should be built. Which end of the bridge. We control one end of the bridge, but we might control both ends and make it happen. But I think that is an interesting topic in general that is broader than the Cardia community, and we might want to invite either other people to participate in ours or help them host an event on the other end. I think that's so I've added that as a future agenda item to try to tackle how to build that bridge. Also, I wanted to make sure that we'd wrapped up everything about the Interop profile. So we've got some targets for our January Interop event, kind of a baseline. And the two key new things are the machine readable governance and protocols, with some work on promoting our last two big learnings and how they are going to be resolved with regard to the shortened URLs and the connection-oriented exchanges. Those are last time learnings, and then getting the word out in what form we publish our profile and get the message out to everybody so that they know what the profile is, so that when they come in, they're not surprised. I think there are some other steps that we need to talk about on office hours and things like that we tried to promote last time that I think were somewhat successful. And there's some things that we should be repeating. But as we get into more details on the Interop event itself, probably in our next meeting, we can talk about some of the other activities that need to go along with the Interop event so that we have a complete and another successful Interop. The first one I think was magnificent in terms of getting people to try this out and make it work. We had some early failures, I think, that were part of our weakness last time that I think we've addressed in terms of getting people the information and something to test against. I think that will go more smoothly this time. Are there other comments about the Interop event or the profile that need to be addressed that are weaknesses that I've overlooked? Other categories of things that should be considered in our profile?
So I just wonder, so we have participant trust checking. Is there any other lower level verification that we would want machine readable governance to do? Like maybe the schema version verification, or I'm just sort of throwing out ideas there, like a level 1 machine readable things that we could pass fail on.
So when we did our very first machine readable governance for a client, the only 2 things we had in it was the list of participants and a list of schemas. But the list of schemas, most of the agents support, if it's an indie-based schema, an Aries indie-based schema, they basically support it. It's not until you get to some of the things like different versions or schemas tied to particular actions and therefore their permissions to do certain things. That's when the schemas became more interesting.
Got it. So tied into the actions.
Yeah, I didn't mention it because at the fundamental or basic case, wasn't super exciting. There wasn't really a lot to do.
Do you think we should include it in our list of things that we're trying to test?
Well, I don't know how people would test it. It's like
pull in the machine readable governance document and see if the schema is one of the ones being presented.
Yeah, although if it's not that interesting until it gets to other points down the road, maybe it's not valuable. I was just thinking about whether or not there's other building block kind of things where we can really say, okay, we've dipped our toe in machine readable governance at the conclusion of the Interopathon.
So Ken's idea was a decent one to say, let's verify that the credential that I'm being issued or being asked to provide is on the list. Could do that. I've been working in tightly controlled circumstances where I didn't have to question that assumption, but that's not always going to be the case. So that's a good idea, Ken. That may not be super complicated, since it's not like super complicated or in the advanced cases yet, then hopefully it'll be really quick for people to do.
So that might be something as simple as
it's like issuance compliance to the schema, right?
Or a presentation that uses the schema that the credential that I have is one of the approved schemas. It's not some weird one that somebody made up. So let's put a question mark on that for January. Let's see.
Yeah, mark it as a stretch goal or an extra credit or something, or maybe we decide it's easy enough that it's part of the list of things we're checking for sure.
Okay, I think that's worthy of consideration, but I don't know if there's it's it's small bang for small bucks, but I don't know if that it's enough of a, I don't know if it's worth the complication at this stage. If we can get it done without it, and we get participant trust checking, and we get the question and answer with present proof 1.0, and we get the shortened URLs, and everybody remembers that we're no longer doing connectionless, nothing with connectionless protocols, then I think that we've had a major victory again, and we can probably queue it up for the next one. But if you look at it and say, oh yeah, we're already doing it, and here's how easy it is to put in the profile, then we can include it. But I'll let an evaluation of that happen to give us some guidance. Anything else on our Interop profile? If not, we can talk about some future agenda items. The Thanksgiving holiday is occurring in the US next week. Therefore, we will be canceling our meeting because most of our participants will be on holiday. So we will have no meeting next week. We have a couple of items for future consideration that we've added: multiple credential presentations and custodial credentials, where you're dealing with typically minors, children, or the disabled, people who need assistance with, can't present their own credentials for whatever reason. So that's another topic we need to look at for future discussions. And then a KYC type of Interop event, and where and who might host that, and how to participate and derive the most value for the medical community, as well as perhaps finance or other organizations that clearly need strong KYC processes. Other things that should go on the agenda for future discussion.
Would just add to the custodial one, it's also really about, and Mike, correct my language if you want to, but like the binding between a credential and the identity, is that by the wallet? What if one phone, is one phone going to have multiple wallets? Is there some linking thing between them? How do those work? So it's not even, it could be like husband and wife share are traveling together and are both using the same phone because everything's on the organizer in the family's phone. How is that going to work? We've been operating on an assumption of one phone, one belly button.
My phone doesn't even have a belly button. But the binding of the individual to a device, or basically to an agent or a wallet, is the issue that you're trying to get to. Yeah. My comedy aside.
Yes. Your comedy is always welcome.
Okay, but the idea is that, how do you properly bind, if you have multiple people using a single device, how do you make sure that now I'm talking about Ken and Ken's credentials, and now I hand it over to Terry, my wife, and say it's Terry's face and Terry's credential, and those two are tied together. How do you accomplish that? Or if you had a child that you were taking with you, and you show your credential and your face, do you now need to validate with their face and their credential? And how do you tie their credential to the child? And then how do you make sure that it's tied correctly to the right grown-up that can assist them or be their guardian or parent, whatever the arrangement is? So that's a good long discussion on